There have been many comic book films that have exceeded my expectations since I was about 5 or 6 years old, but none made me feel a way like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1. When I think of that movie, I think it's very nostalgic to me and it's very comforting for me. It was my first experience with the character. And in my opinion, this movie is like the best modern take on one of pop culture's biggest icons. It's funny, I vividly remember being a kid and watching the movies on DVD. I had the DVD variety pack case, which came with all three, and I remember watching them all the time when I was at my grandparents' house. And those are just some of the funnest memories ever. Like, Tobey Maguire has always been my favorite version of Spider-Man. Not just for nostalgia's sake, but because he was like my first childhood hero. Like, he was the one who made me love superhero movies a lot more. He quite literally elevated Spider-Man's mainstream appeal. But why? Why is the Raimi trilogy so loved by Spider-Man fans? And why is it seen as the perfect superhero trilogy? Well, for today, we are going to look back at Sam Raimi's first installment of Spider-Man and I guess point out just how good it holds up 23 years later. So if you're new here and you like Spider-Man or you just like, superhero content like this, feel free to subscribe to the channel and drop a like on the video while you're at it. But anyways, without further ado, let's dive in. So if there's one scene of Spider-Man that always pops up in my head when I think of the character, or if I'm like talking about him with other people, it's always going to be this scene. I mean, come on, dude. Like, if you grew up in the early 2000s like I did, then you understand how awesome this scene was to see for the first time. It was so breathtaking, and it was so, not only would I consider this the most iconic Spider-Man moment of all time, but probably the most iconic superhero moment of all time, and there are a handful of those.
I am the Mandarin!
When it comes to like best origin stories ever told on screen, my three are always Batman Begins, Spider-Man 1, and Iron Man. It's not just because they're some of the best written comic book films I've ever seen, but they establish clear goals for how to make a good superhero movie. They're goofy and thrilling and exciting and even romantic. Spider-Man 1 broke the mold on how to bring the comic book adaptations to life. From the action scenes to the character interactions to the overall aesthetic of the movie, it felt very much like an Ultimate Spider-Man comic. I can guarantee you, if you open that up or open up any Spider-Man comic for that matter, the shit will look highly identical. That's how much attention to detail Sam Raimi put into not one, not two, but all three movies. But rather than just viewing Spider-Man 1 as a superhero movie, it was a faithful tribute to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's greatest creation. A monument to the success of Spider-Man and all that he's brought to pop culture for over the last 60 plus years. You see, in the Spider-Man mythology, there's always this dichotomy between Spider-Man as a persona and Peter Parker, the ordinary kid. One who is socially awkward and most of the time unsure about himself, while the other is extremely confident and heroic. This dichotomy works for the sole purpose of maintaining a good sense of relatability, which is a clear vision for what Stan Lee had when creating this character. He's always been vocal about how Spider-Man's a very relatable superhero because he has financial issues or problems with women, or just life is just kicking his ass constantly.
Isn't that right? Huh? Isn't that right?
The one thing that makes Spider-Man 1 special compared to all the other comic book movies is his vulnerability. The fact that a character like Spider-Man, who is so cool and so awesome at what he does, right? Being a normal, ordinary high school kid who's navigating the trials and errors of life. It's absolutely amazing.
Say that again?
You know, a key theme for Spider-Man as a character is responsibility. We can all relate to having that one person in our lives that always encouraged us to hold on a second longer. I'm sure we've all had that loved one or a friend or anyone for that matter that we can call a family member that provides us with a sense of comfortability and reassurance that Uncle Ben did with Peter Parker. And he's a crucial part of Peter's life because not only does his death influence Peter to become Spider-Man, but it teaches Peter to become a better person, to never give up on what's most important, and to be kind and help those in need.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Hence the reason why Spider-Man was born, displaying that sheer bravado and willpower that a hero possesses. Despite the insulting rumors, Spidey is a hero that everyone looks up to. This movie does a very good job of showing Spider-Man as that symbolic representation of hope and compassion. He's not just a random guy in a skin-tight red and blue suit, but the hometown hero, the people's champion. Of course, another reason why I love this film so much is because of Green Goblin. Probably one of the best supervillain portrayals in live action. If there was like a Mount Rushmore of live action supervillains, Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin goes up there. His performance was truly one of the greatest things I've ever seen in film. He brought that level of intimidation and ferocity from the comic books, you know, giving him that classic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde trope was brilliant. You know, it points out how the Goblin Serum kind of forged this split identity on Norman Osborn. So Norman Osborn is already a broken individual who feels like he's lost everything, and the Green Goblin tries to act as that voice of reason for Norman to seek vengeance on what he's lost.
You know how much I sacrificed?
And often than that, this movie likes to highlight significant parallels between characters, pointing out their flaws and also insinuating how much they can relate to one another. A major example not only being Peter and Norman Osborn, as they are equal counterparts, but also Peter Parker and Mary Jane, as they are two characters on different sides of the spectrum yet coincide with each other's dreams, their ambitions, and even their emotions. You know, since the very beginning of the movie, they've always made it clear that this movie was a love story, right? In this case being about Peter's secretive love for Mary Jane Watson, the girl that lived next door to him since he was a little kid. You remember that feeling of when you were a kid and you had a crush on a girl for the very first time, but you wouldn't dare tell her how you felt about her, right? Because that's just not how it worked. Well, think of it the same way as Peter Parker, being so head over heels for a girl, yet he's so frightened by even admitting his feelings to her. I mean, I ask you, how much more relatable can it get to this point? I mean, seriously. How can a fictional character like Spider-Man be so mentally and emotionally attuned with his fans? Well, it's because of who he is as a person. You know, Peter is a very resilient and very free-spirited person who tries to be better every day. And Spider-Man is an extension of what he believes in, kind of takes after him and uses his powers for good. And also, to make one more point very clear, the best thing about this movie was that it felt like a superhero movie. You know, it was very colorful. It had a lot of like cheesy one-liners and a lot of action-packed scenes. Looked very identical to like your typical Steve Ditko Stan Lee Spider-Man comic. And the bridge scene, oh my god. I feel like this scene right here kind of cemented Spider-Man as like one of the greatest heroes of all time. But in the grand scheme of things, this movie really did boost Spider-Man's popularity, giving the character a more mainstream appeal to audiences. And that's not to say the 90s animated series didn't do the exact same thing. Sure it did, but it mostly boosted the popularity of action figures. That's kind of the whole main intention of that show to begin with. But Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies made people actually believe in putting on the mask and becoming a hero, becoming like their very own Spider-Man. Tobey Maguire, like I said, has always been a childhood hero of mine. And he gave a level of depth and realism to the character that any teenage kid could relate to. Without Spider-Man 1, there wouldn't be a 2 or 3 or even the Amazing Spider-Man films or the MCU Spider-Man films or the Spider-Verse films for that matter. This movie changed the entire superhero genre as a whole. But hey, if you made it to the end of this video, feel free to like the video and subscribe if you're new. I really appreciate you for sticking around to the end. Funny enough, this video took me like at least within like the last month or so, at least 10 times to record. And I'm probably like the most mentally exhausted at doing this video. So I want to end it off on a good note. All right, I truly appreciate you guys for sticking around. Until then, be sure to smile because it never hurts to do so.